In today's video, I'll be breaking down exactly why a couple age 61 with $1.9 million in savings may not be able to retire. My company and I have helped countless clients navigate the complexities of retirement timing so that they can retire at exactly the right time without having to worry about whether or not their retirement will last. Unfortunately, most retirees fall for the just one more year syndrome, delaying retirement out for fear of being unprepared, potentially sacrificing the most vibrant years of freedom. Well, luckily, in today's video, we're going to help to clarify this. I will not only walk you through why a married couple age 61 with 1.9 million may not be able to retire, I'll walk you through the thought process behind it so you can apply this process to your own life. So the couple I'll be reviewing today is John and Jane Rowe. John and Jane are ages 61 and 61 respectively, and they have two adult children, so college is a thing of the past. John and Jane are both gainfully employed as a project manager and a sales producer in the tech industry. They live in a nice suburb in Greater Chicago, and between the two of them, they're earning roughly $325,000 before taxes and are adding in the upwards of $50,000 to their 401ks. This has generally been the case for much of their careers. They've been saving primarily in their retirement accounts from their employers, but Jane's only living parent unfortunately passed away several years ago, leaving her with the family home, which she sold, leaving her with a lump of cash, and she eventually spread it across various financial investments. So let's take a look at John and Jane's assets. So their financial savings are roughly $1.9 million, with $1.1 million of that in several retirement accounts and the remaining $800,000 in taxable non-retirement accounts, mostly from the inheritance. Their assets are allocated roughly 60-40 between stocks and bonds, which we're assuming earn an average annual return of roughly 5% annually over the life of their plan. They also have a primary residence that's worth around $800,000 that they plan on keeping and retiring in so they can stay close to their kids and eventually their grandkids. And since they have to live somewhere, we're ignoring this asset for planning purposes. What we aren't ignoring is the mortgage on the house that will be gone in roughly 3 years, which will certainly work to their favor as it'll free up over $20,000 a year in cash flow as the principal and interest payments will go away. So the big questions for John and Jane are: how much do they spend? 2, how much do they expect to spend in retirement? And 3, how much income are they going to have from their guaranteed sources? These are certainly multifaceted questions, but they're so important because the answers to them will ultimately determine whether or not retirement is feasible. So we'll ultimately use the answers to determine how their retirement may play out should they retire now. So how much do John and Jane spend? So let's think about John and Jane's current income to back into this answer. How much do they make? We've established that they've been consistently bringing in roughly $325,000 before taxes with a raise for inflation each year. They've also been stuffing around $50,000 of this into their 401k accounts before paying any taxes. So they don't get their hands on this money. So based on their earned income and what's owed on dividends and interest that they earn on those taxable dollars that they've had invested, they've been paying roughly $100,000 in income and investment taxes. These are also dollars that aren't available for them to spend on stuff. So they started with $325,000. They've been saving $50,000 of that before paying their taxes. So now we're at $275,000, and then they pay $100,000 in taxes, and now we're at $175,000 that's been available for them to spend on whatever they want. But how much of this have they actually been spending? The numbers won't lie. So the next place to look at is their bank savings accounts where their checks are normally being deposited into. John and Jane mentioned that they've been noticing their bank accounts have been steadily rising by around $25,000 a year. So of that $175,000, they haven't been spending $25,000. So they're presumably spending $175,000 minus $25,000 or $150,000. But we're not done because looking at a few years of spending doesn't capture the full picture. What about the intermittent costs for maintaining and improving their home? These are expenses that wouldn't occur on a regular basis, so they wouldn't normally be captured in your normal cash flow, but they're bound to occur over time. These are things like a new roof or a new driveway. Since there's really no way to know exactly what these costs will be, the best thing to do, in my experience, is to make an assumption, which I've found typically falls somewhere along a spectrum of 1 to 2% of the home's value each year. John knows his way around a skill saw, so he asked to assume that the lower cost of the end of the spectrum be assumed to capture these costs somewhere. So I'm going to add another $10,000 to their spending, resulting in a final annual living expense of roughly $160,000 per year. Now the good news is that their mortgage is almost gone, so this number is going to drop eventually to $140,000, but I'm getting ahead of myself. So the second question, how much much do John and Jane expect to spend in retirement? The reality for most people is that their spending won't change by much. If anything, it will rise as time frees up, but what will drop off is their income taxes and the fact that they won't be saving in retirement accounts, if you want to consider that an expense. Regardless of this, John and Jane can't think of any material living expenses that will go away when they retire, so they really feel that it would be groundless just to adjust their normal living expense assumption in retirement downwards. Another important point to make with respect to the retirement expenses is that if they each retire early, then they're going to be on the hook for private medical insurance until their Medicare kicks in. So for each year that they're not working before the age of 65, they're going to have an incremental cost for health insurance of roughly $20,000 a year. So assuming that they retire now at the age of 61, they're going to have $160,000 in normal living expenses plus $20,000 in private medical insurance premiums for a total spending of $180,000 until their mortgage drops off in 3 years, which will bring it down to roughly $160,000, and then finally to $140,000 when they go on Medicare. Now to the income side of the ledger, which is also incredibly important because whatever they don't have in income is going to have to come from their assets. This is really the crux of the issue. Do they have enough saved today to replace the hole in their income for the rest of their lives? So the only source of income that John and Jane will have is from their Social Security benefits. John and Jane have logged into the Social Security website and got estimates of around $37,000 and $44,000 a year for their expected benefits if they wait until their full retirement ages of 67. An important side note, if you're not familiar, Social Security quotes are always measured in today's dollars. And since these benefits are cost of living adjusted, their future benefits will always be higher. We'll adjust for this when we're modeling their retirement. If you're not familiar with Social Security, retirees are eligible to begin receiving their benefits as soon as the age is 62, with the exception of divorcee benefits, which they can take a little bit earlier. The issue with taking benefits at 62 is that they're permanently reduced by as much as 30% if they're on your own historical income. Now, John and Jane's issue is that they have a serious hole in their income without the Social Security, and they'll have to put significant stress on their assets to support their spending during those years. We'll look at both scenarios, but I will say that the benefit of having more years of less benefits is generally not worth it, especially when you consider the possibility for weak markets during those years that you're not receiving your Social Security benefits, because the more money that you have invested as a result of having that income are being outgrown by your Social Security benefits that are increasing the longer that you wait, while also being adjusted each year for inflation. So now let's take a look at how this all plays out if they retire at the age of 61. What you can see on your screen is the output of a Monte Carlo simulation, which is sort of a buzzword that's been getting a lot of attention, for better or for worse, but it's an incredibly powerful tool nevertheless because it can be used in so many different ways. So the 3 lines on your chart are different paths that John and Jane's money can take, changing only the investment return that's earned in their portfolio based on an average annual return and its expected fluctuations during different markets. What we're trying to discern is the likelihood of John and Jane running out of money based on when they retire. Remember, the earlier that they retire, the more years that they'll have to pull from their portfolio, and the greater their expense at the time for incremental costs for private healthcare premiums. So the bottom yellow line represents the 10th percentile of potential outcomes. Or in English, another way to view this is that there's a 10% probability of this occurring. This is a pretty rigorous threshold because it represents a market scenario that's worse than the decades following the Great Depression of the 1930s. So what I like to do is assess a bad case scenario and an average case scenario, and then stack that up against John and Jane's odds of still being alive. So in the event that John and Jane retire at the age of 61, there's clearly a very high probability that they'll have to make some serious adjustments to avoid running out of money during their lifetime. More specifically, based on our assumptions, which I believe to be very reasonable, there's a roughly 10% chance that they'll have to make an adjustment to their financial plan, either by going back to work or spending significantly less before they reach the age of 74. And their money is expected to last until the age 82 otherwise, on average, during a normal market. At the age of 82, there's a roughly 94% probability that at least one of them will still be alive. So this is clearly not ideal. But let's pull some levers that maybe increase their odds of being successful. Let's assume that instead of taking Social Security at their full retirement age, they both take it early. So it improves their odds under a bad case scenario, but it's still not looking very good overall. Now let's assume that Jane delays and John takes his benefits at the age of 62. So this improves their overall odds of being successful, but it actually makes their situation worse under a bad market scenario. John also says that he'd be willing to do consulting for 5 years, earning around $50,000 a year. So this certainly helps with their money now lasting into their mid-80s on average in an average market scenario, but it still has their odds of needing to make a major change before their mid-70s at a level that's pretty uncomfortable. So should John and Jane choose to retire at the age of 61, their odds aren't good. And that simply means that they'll have to make a serious change to avoid facing financial peril or being forced to rely upon their children, which is a non-starter for them. So when is the optimal time for John and Jane to retire? Let's take a look at some different scenarios. Let's assume that they wait another 2 years without any post-retirement consulting. Now things are starting to look a little bit better. Their money's now lasting into their mid-90s on average, and there's a very low probability that they'll have to make a major adjustment before the age of 81. Now let's assume that they retire at the age of 63 and John does the consulting for 5 years. Now they're looking at a bad and unlikely case scenario getting them into their mid-80s, which I would view as a pass as long as they don't have any high conviction around the potential for longevity. But John also mentioned that he truly doesn't want to do any consulting after retirement, and they're also a bit fearful for longevity as John still has 2 living parents in their late 80s and his grandparents lived into their 90s. They also mentioned the willingness to self-insure for long-term care related risks because they have a bit of long-term care insurance and they feel that this scenario would be one that they'd be comfortable relying on support from their children. So given what we know, I would suggest that they plan to work at least until the age of 66. I believe that this leaves them with a retirement plan that has a very low probability of failure, especially after you consider the fact that we're assuming that they're spending the same amount for the rest of their lives, when in reality, it's more likely that their lifestyle will slow down as they age, organically adjusting their lifestyle to offset the probability of a bad outcome. It goes without saying at this point that there are a lot of variables that come with deciding on the timing around retirement. Everybody's situation is genuinely unique to them, which is why it's so important to build and maintain a financial plan that's tailored to your needs. Now you know exactly why a couple age 61 with $1.9 million saved may not be able to retire yet, and the exact thought process behind it. You now have what you need to go and apply this process to your own life and to understand if you are ready to retire. However, remember that everybody's situation is different, and there are many small questions and roadblocks that will likely come up in your situation that I was not able to cover in a short video. So if you want a team of experts to analyze your situation specifically and help you to understand if you are ready, then click the link in the description. This will take you to a page where you're able to schedule a completely complimentary call with me where I'll help you to begin to take the next step in securing your financial future.